Okay, if members of the Council and members of the public could be resuming their seats, please. As I said earlier, we're not doing the Headcorn and East Sutton applications. We will be moving to item 17, page 92, land south of Redwall Lane, Linton. Don't jump, Simon. I'm sorry, if members aren't seated in 30 seconds, they won't be voting on this application.
5.
Thank you. Right. I'll call on the officer to introduce the application, land south of Redwall Lane, Linton, please.
Thank you, Chair. There was an urgent update unseen where there's been four further representations which have raised issues that have been addressed in the main report. I'd like to also, just for a procedural matter, draw attention to reasons in the conditions and just seek delegated authority to insert reasons to conditions 4, 5, 11 and 17, and also delete conditions 14 and 22 because they are covered by the landscape and ecology plan, which is covered by the section 106, the heads of terms in section 8. So I'll move on to the main report. The application relates to the construction of a warehouse building and offices for occupation by the company known as Berry Gardens for the packing and distribution for soft fruit, along with headquarters for its company. The site will deliver a bespoke building along with car parking and other facilities and a substantial biodiversity and landscaping area, which will also include sustainable drainage and new habitat. Just take you through the aerial photos of the site. The site is located to the south of Redwall Lane in the parish of Linton and adjoins the existing Wares Farm industrial estate to the north, further industrial type buildings to the east, van accommodation, along with polytunnels to the southeast. Open countryside lies out to the south and west. And the River Butte and its triple SI lies to the southern boundary, which you can see right at the bottom of the picture. The main route to the site for staff is via Redwall Lane and the A229, with a large proportion of traffic utilising Linton Crossroads, which lies to the north and can be seen on this wider aerial photo up here, and the site is identified down here. The site has a strong relationship with Clockhouse Farm at Coxheath and other local suppliers, although a large proportion of the produce is imported from elsewhere in the UK and beyond. The business is currently located on the northern Wares Farm complex and is responsible for providing chilled storage, packing and dispatch of soft fruit to major supermarkets, although the building at present is quite disjointed and sort of grown up in a piecemeal fashion. So I'll just take you through views of the site so you can get a picture of the context. Here's looking west along Redwall Lane. You can see the front of the Wares Farm industrial estate in the background there, and buildings to the left. That's looking back east along Redwall Lane with the Wares Farm to the left. That's looking east where you can see the backdrop of buildings further east along Redwall Lane. And that's looking at the frontage of the site where the existing bungalow is, which is proposed to be demolished. That's from within the site looking northwards towards the Wares Farm industrial estate. That's from in the site looking towards River Farm, which lies to the northwest of the site. And that's looking from the north part of the site down the eastern boundary, where you can see those other buildings and the bund sort of in the background there. This is the public footpath that runs along the north of the river, looking up towards, you can see the Wares Farm industrial area in the backdrop. And that's looking down from Greensand Way with the Wares Farm and polytunnels you can see in the distance. And there it is again through the orchards from the Greensand Way to the north. So moving on to the development itself, the building will amount to a building of around 18,000 square metres, which will include a mezzanine floor of around 4,500 square metres, which itself will accommodate the staff headquarters and canteen and other staff facilities. The ground floor will be set out for chilled storage, packing and dispatch with a one-way access through the site. The biodiversity and landscape area will sweep around the south of the site and sort of park into either side of the building. The building will be built to BREEAM very good standards, with the applicant offering outstanding in terms of energy, and this is obviously an increase on or improvement over the current building. This is an entrance taken from the north, a CGI image of the building with the entrance to the headquarters in the corner there. And these are the elevations of the building. This long elevation is the elevation that will run down the site north to south. And then you've got the three bays that will form the north and south elevations, with the loading bays for the lorries to intake and outtake of goods. This is essentially the chilled storage at the southern part of the building. So a lorry will come in, drop off the intake of produce, and it will move through the building to the other end, where a lorry will then take it out to be sort of for dispatch. And this is the mezzanine floor, where you can see offices, archives and canteen and other facilities. That's a section of the site where you can see the sort of the building here and the landscaping running down to the river on that side. So there's obviously a number of issues set out in the report, and I can summarise them as follows as I see them as an officer. The economic benefits of the development are profound. It's an expansion of an existing building located on an adjacent development industrial site. The applicant has investigated alternative sites to develop this current and future level of growth, but it's been determined that there's a lack of alternative sites to deliver this growth. The development will provide a range of economic benefits, including retention of existing jobs, as there's the real potential if that there is the possibility of relocation outside of the borough, and also development of new jobs, investment and support to the local supply chain, which include Clockhouse Farm, which deliver a large majority of its local produce, and other benefits such as business rates and other sort of locally derived benefits. Against that, there's obviously the landscape impact, which there's no getting away from. It's a large building in a countryside location, and although there has been a big effort to mitigate this through a substantial landscape and biodiversity buffer amounting to around 9 hectares, which is an unusual opportunity for landscape and ecological benefits. The development will obviously, as on maturity of that landscape, will be screened in certain views, but there will be remaining views of the building, i.e. from Redwall Lane, and from long-range views from the Greensand Way. Although, going back to the photograph, it should be sort of acknowledged that there is a block of development that it will relate to, rather than being an isolated feature in the landscape. But the officers and the report does acknowledge there is a significant impact on landscape that would be contrary to the policies in the local plan and the emerging plan, and that weighs against the development. In support of the application, this landscape buffer, whilst it will offer screening benefits from certain views, there is a massive opportunity in terms of biodiversity, which this will provide 9 hectares of new habitat and planting and other ecological features which are to be secured on a long-term management basis. And the site has also been designated as a potential location for relocation of protected species and has been put forward as a Natural England pilot scheme for great crested newts. The location of the site, both in terms of landscape character and highway issues, have been raised in terms of the location being a countryside location, but the applicant has produced a transport assessment and he's proposing a range of highway improvements as part of the scheme, including access design from the site to prevent westerly HGV travel on Redwall Lane, improvements on Redwall Lane to increase forward visibility and other benefits for highway safety, and the junction with the A229. The applicant is also content to enter into a HGV routing agreement and a monitoring committee to monitor westerly travel or the use of Redwall Lane for rat running or increased traffic. Perhaps the most sort of noted objection to this application is the impact on Linton Crossroads, which is a major theme in not just this application but other housing schemes in the local area, and who have paid contributions to the upgrade of that crossroads. And the applicant has done more work on that in terms of assessing the impact of this development cumulatively with other developments, and it is acknowledged with other developments there will be an impact in terms of congestion and queue lengths. And to mitigate that, the applicant is proposing the transfer of land to the southwest of the crossroads to enable additional land to support the future improvement scheme, which would allow a left lane, and has done further studies on that issue in terms of the impact on mitigating congestion, and it significantly reduces on completion of that improvement scheme the queue lengths and congestion to an acceptable level. The applicant is also proposing contributions to relocation of a bus stop on the western arm of Heath Road, which currently prevents cars when buses stop, and also potential contributions to the improvement scheme itself in order to accelerate the delivery of that improvement scheme, which is a major part of the local plan infrastructure plan set out in the local plan documents. In respect of all other matters such as drainage, air quality and other relevant matters, the development is considered acceptable. And so in summary, whilst the development would cause harm to the character of the countryside and would be contrary to the countryside policies, it is considered the economic benefits to support a growing business and retention of existing jobs and new jobs in the backdrop of a lack of alternative sites for relocation holds substantial weight in favour of the development, and this, together with the ecology benefits from sustainable construction, renewable energy, it is considered to outweigh this conflict with countryside policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Will. All right, we move on to the public speaking part of this application, and our first speaker is Mr. Lucas. I'm sure you know how to do it. Yeah, thank you.
Chairman and members, just 3 important points. 1, the proposal breaches key planning policies. 2, it's in the wrong location for a growing international business. 3, the business case is biased and highly questionable. In the office's report before you, there are 2 words that frequently recur. Those words are whilst and although. Whilst this application represents a departure from the development plan, whilst the location is not strategically located, although the scheme will result in landscape harm to the countryside, etc., etc. I'm afraid the style of emphasis brought to my mind the awful tragedy of Grenfell Towers. And I couldn't help wondering if Kensington councillors had been seduced by phrases such as, whilst the proposed cladding is not the safest available, it is compliant and it does save £500,000. Now, I'm not suggesting...
I'm sorry, that's completely... I'm not allowing you to say that. Stick to the planning issues, please.
Okay. I'm not suggesting... But this is the point. I'm not suggesting safety is an issue here, nor landscapes are comparable with human lives. My point is that an economic argument can be very seductive in difficult times. But the role of councillors such as yourselves is to uphold planning policies that are in place for good reason. In this case, to protect our cherished countryside from irreversible damage. As a businessman, I support local businesses and job creation, but the vast scale of this development, the size of 6 football pitches, is disproportionate and contravenes both the National Policy Planning Framework and local plan guidelines. The site adjoins a special landscape area and it's opposite an important heritage building. Moreover, the international business will result in over 1,000 additional vehicles onto country roads every single day, including nearly 100 HGVs a day. Redwall Lane is a winding country lane, often just 5 minutes wide. That's about as far as you members are apart from each other. It leads onto Linton Hill in the conservation area, massively increasing the congestion at the already overcapacity Linton Crossroads. What would this do to noise levels that are already above World Health Organization levels? And would air quality at Cornwallis School become as bad as that at Wheatsheaf Junction, which itself would be impacted by this proposal? I see little mention of this in the available documentation. Finally, the business case. The applicants assert a rural location is key to their corporate image, and having been MD of Saatchi & Saatchi, I can assert that's utter nonsense. Most clients won't even see the building or its location, and in any event is a gigantic metal-framed, metal-clad building, the corporate image of a soft fruit business. I'm sure they've searched other sites, but they clearly want to expand from the current one, so was their heart really in the search? I hope you'll reject this application and give the applicants every possible support in finding a different, more fit-for-purpose site near the motorway network. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh. I'm sorry, any more of that and the public gallery will be cleared. There will be no applause, booing or anything else. Councillor Whitmarsh, Linton Parish Council, please.
Councillors, good evening. This is a complex and an extensive application, not to be summarised in 3 minutes. We have written a long letter from Linton giving our reasons why we want this application refused. Do hope that you've read it and taken on board what we say. If what Councillor Harwood said earlier on is correct, that you have to work within an existing planning framework, then it seems to me you have no choice but to refuse this application. It breaches so many aspects of it. It's in breach of the National Planning Policy Framework. It's in breach of quite a number of local plan policies, both from the old plan and the new plan, including a specific statement modified into the plan by the inspector as follows. Development proposals in the countryside will not be permitted unless they accord with other policies in this plan and will not result in harm to the character and appearance of the area. It's demonstrated that that is going to be breached in this case. It also contravenes most of the landscape guidelines that you commissioned and agreed in 2013. Even the committee report is not very convincing. As the previous speaker said, the summary of reasons for recommendation says in so many words that this is a significant departure from the development plan, that the location is wrong for most of the business concerned, there will be serious landscape harm to the countryside, and there will be significant transport and other impacts as well. The case in favour, we don't believe, is nearly as strong as it's made out to be. No new jobs are guaranteed. The country lanes around this site are inadequate even for the existing traffic and lorry movements, never mind the additional ones proposed. We believe that if it goes ahead, the whole character of Linton will change. We will no longer be the rural village that we are at the moment. Local amenity will be badly, adversely affected. Please don't destroy our village. Please don't undermine our faith in the planning process.
Thank you, Councillor.
You have 30 seconds back.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. There you go.
Councillor Thomas, Hunton Parish Council.
I'm Chairman of Hunton Parish Council. And Hunton Parish Council is absolutely horrified by the officer's recommendation to approve this planning application by Allen Firmin Limited for this massive warehouse-type building, larger than 5 football pitches, to be used at least for an initial period by the joint applicant, Berry Gardens Limited. Although the site's in Linton, Hunton starts just to the west and would be seriously affected. The only reason for this officer recommendation we see is the economic benefits arising from this, from Berry Gardens, which is and has been expanding pretty rapidly, and good luck to them. Although the 20% in the officer's report seems rather more than the mathematics if you look at their projections, which is about 14% maximum. They are, however, projecting a doubling of their staff between now and 2024, which seems disproportionately high to their output. They have some 30% of the UK market, they claim, at the moment. The market may be beginning to become saturated a bit. So can they really double in that few years? It's easy to put these numbers down on paper, but it's a very different matter trying to achieve them in practice. A large number of their staff appear to be EU seasonal workers, which appears to be housed in caravans on the existing site. And you'll see that in paragraph 1.1 and 6.19 in the officer's report to the committee. It's difficult to see any economic benefit to Maidstone from these people in this situation, and we believe that this benefit has been grossly overstated. The application is hugely damaging, not just to the immediate landscape, but the villages of Linton and Hunton, and it's contrary to so many policies. As already been mentioned, the Local Plan 2000, and it's not in the current draft local plan, and it's contrary in particular to policies coming in at SB17, and it's contrary to at least 9 paragraphs in the NPPF which have not been mentioned. Berry Gardens state they've been unable to find a satisfactory designated employment site elsewhere in the borough, but this is not a designated employment site. It's a field in agricultural use. At least 83% of Berry Gardens fruit is imported, mostly from the continent but further afield, and there's a growing and huge number of HGVs which have to leave the motorway or main road system to get to this highly inconvenient place. The existing site is also being retained as an employment site, and this will bring about a tripling of the traffic on Red Bull Lane, which is totally unsuitable for this. The turnout on the A229 is dangerous, whatever you do, and it gets worse as it gets into Martin, the Staplehurst traffic. The Hunton end is impossible for lorries. Impossible.
I'm sorry, that's time, Councillor.
Right.
Mr. Marston for the applicant, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman and members. My name is Nick Marston from Berry Gardens. We started the Berry Gardens business in West Kent in 1996. We employed 18 staff and we had a turnover of £18 million. In 1999, we expanded our activities and located our then new packing and operational activities to Wares Farm at Linton. Since then, we've grown to employ 434 staff, the great majority from the Borough of Maidstone. We have a turnover of £315 million, and we're very proud of the contribution we have made to the employment and prosperity of this borough over the last near 20 years. As a growers cooperative, we're a rural business with national and international farmer representation, but critically, a significant proportion of our UK production is located in and around the Maidstone area, with farms also contributing to the local economy and the well-being of the countryside. The growth of our activities and those of our nearby farmers has created and will continue to create, should our planning application be supported, jobs and opportunity for the residents of Maidstone. The relocation of our head office jobs from our national enterprise to the Maidstone Borough from Tunbridge Wells is another advantageous feature of this application. I believe the high standards of construction, both on-site and with surrounding environmental measures, mitigation measures for vehicular traffic, all show that we're a business that is committed to both the quality of life as well as the prosperity of the whole area. The landscape and ecological area proposed as part of our will, for example, add 25 acres of new and enhanced varied habitat. Bury Gardens is a well-regarded business that operates to the highest standards of integrity, as witnessed by the fact that we've operated on a scale at Wares Farm since 1999 without any complaint from local residents, the parish council or the borough council. Our berries are healthy, non-processed and a very high value per tonne. This means we can generate jobs, 1,000 by 2024 on pay rates well above national averages, whilst producing a much lower pro rata increase in HGV traffic than just about any other commercial activity that may exist in the area now or in the future. The proposal before you has been designed to meet and exceed all the environmental and other policies of the Council, and we'll be pleased to arrange the monitoring service to ensure all stakeholders are happy that conditions and limits are being adhered to and that any issues are acted on. We therefore ask that the members endorse the officer's recommendation for approval of this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr Marsden. Councillor Firmer, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members, for allowing me to speak on the planning application today, which has fostered great emotion with many residents in my ward. I will touch on a few of the issues they have themselves expressed in well-considered letters they've already sent to you. For those residents who have contacted me over the many months leading up to today, this planning application represents a systematic failure of both authorities, the borough and the county, to listen to their daily pleas. From the parents who now have to leave the house an hour earlier to take their child to school and get to work on time, or the Hunton Village Facebook group contributors who it has become a daily occurrence to be stuck behind an HGV stranded on a country lane. For those residents, this application and its recommendation for approval by officers means one thing: we are still not listening to them. Residents are rightly frustrated that our roads cannot take more traffic, which in this case will worsen immensely. Nearly 100 more HGV trips and 250 LGV trips in 24-hour period, nearly 1,000 additional one-way car trips. Hunton Parish Council and residents have recorded a total of 124 incidents, collisions, accidents and near misses for mainly HGVs incorrectly using country lanes just in the last year. But I know, members, that you will find it hard to override KCC highways, even if their promises are false, as I believe they are. You can, however, take a rational look at the impact this development will have on our countryside, contravening, among others, ENV 28 and NPPF. As it states in the paper, in terms of the landscape impact, the development would interrupt the openness which currently contributes to the intrinsic character of the local landscape. The urbanising features, such as car parking, are grossly inappropriate for the character of the place, and the development is contrary to landscape guidelines set out in the LCAA. We need to bring investment and jobs to this borough, but it should not be at the cost of our natural environment. Our rural landscape is precious. We must ask ourselves what we want for our borough. We need real, legitimate and well-evidenced growth and investment in the right areas, complemented, of course, by the attractive landscape of the Weald for us all to enjoy. I'll conclude with a final thought. There's a growing feeling by residents of our borough that they are not being listened to. Let us prove to those residents here today that we don't just represent residents who are the most well-connected, those who know how to work the system better, or who write the biggest cheques. Thank you.
Councillor Webb, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joy of speaking last is that I do not wish to repeat myself on some, so I shall try and edit some of the points that have already been made. As you can see, there has been considerable presentation from the local community of both Hunton and Linton, as well as there have been comments from residents of Coxheath. Councillor Firmer and myself have been approached to speak against this proposal, and even Councillor Mortimer wished he was here because, unfortunately, he has had ill health, as people are aware. and he has decided that, as he sits also on the Planning Referrals Committee, he understands about planning neutrality. He does not wish to be here. If we move to Hunton, the Redwall Lane westward of the site becomes a very narrow country lane, which has weight restrictions preventing heavy lorries from going this way. However, if there's a problem blocking the A229 Linton Hill, this will become the only access to the site, and lorry drivers have a tendency to ignore restrictions they know will not be policed. As for the private vehicles bringing staff to the site, with the relocation from the Five Oak Green site, staff, many who are coming from the west of the development, and therefore it will be easier for them to go through the Hunton area. This will cause increased load on the rural section of the highway network. Moving to Linton, many comments have been made about the access along the A229. Traffic assessment included in this application has suggested many ways to improve traffic flow. Redesign the Redwall Lane junction, improving the width at the 90-degree bend near Davies Cottages, and of course Linton Crossroads. There are proposals from the developer, along with the landowner, to increase the size of Linton Crossroads to help the traffic flow better. This builds along the lines of the Mott MacDonald report that was produced for the NBC a few years ago. However, it is KCC that the highway authorities, and I've not seen any plans for the junction improvements from them. They would need to do their own assessment, and from what I've been told at the present time, KCC has not been given any proposals for the crossroads themselves. To do so would involve costs to assess the situation, then draw plans, then do the work. Now this application is prepared for Section 106 monies and even land to be set aside for KCC, how many recent developments have also contributed to this junction? Can officers update us on how many agreed 106 payments have been put towards this site? And is there any monies available now for KCC to do work on it? This development has greatly altered the outlook from the Greensand Way overlooking Linton and the Weald, and as the officer referred to, it would be contrary to the countryside policies of this emerging plan. So we have to look at all these issues to see what can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Now, as Mr Wynne referred to, there is an urgent update, so I hope members, if they haven't done it already, will look at that. Now, can I take declarations of lobbying at this point? I should imagine that's practically everyone. Yeah. Yep, that's everyone. Thank you very much. I should start asking who hasn't been in future. It'd be easier, wouldn't it? Right. This is a very interesting application. I don't think we got a ward member here. Just checking. I know that's Coxheath and Hunton. Two of them have spoken. The third sits on planning referrals, so obviously. Although I would say that, unless I've missed something, I don't think this is likely to be one that would trouble that committee, because it is, wouldn't be unreasonable whichever decision was made this evening, because it is one of those balanced applications. Right. A lot has been said about highways, so I think it's appropriate at this point to ask the highway officer why they feel that minded not to object to this application, subject to the mitigation. Brendan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there are a number of key issues that the highway authorities had to consider very carefully when reviewing this application. And perhaps the most pivotal of those is subject of mitigation of impact at the Linton Crossroads junction. Now, it's well known that this junction is already congested, particularly at peak periods. And even when accounting for the shift working patterns of the business, there will be a substantive impact on queuing and delay, particularly during the PM peak period. So with this in mind, it was evident from the outset that there was a need for robust mitigation to be provided at that junction, and the Highway Authority raised a holding objection on that basis. Now, with that in mind, the applicant undertook further work and has ultimately put forward a form of junction improvement that will achieve greater capacity for traffic flow through carriageway widening and will also assist highway safety by improving manoeuvring space at the junction and reducing the cycle time of the signals so that there is less delays for pedestrians to wait to cross, and also by incorporating an all-red pedestrian phase within the signal sequence so that pedestrians have a dedicated opportunity to cross at that junction. The capacity modelling that was undertaken based on that improvement showed that to mitigate the impact of the development, taking account of all of the cumulative housing growth in the locality. And indeed, it offered potential for conditions to even be better than they are now. On this basis, the Highway Authority felt that the junction improvement did provide an acceptable form of mitigation. However, what is essential is that that mitigation is delivered when it is needed. Therefore, the removal of our holding objection was subject to a requirement that the applicant enters into a Section 278 agreement with the Highway Authority to enable the junction improvement to be implemented prior to commercial operation of the development. Now, the other key issue, and there is a relationship with Linton Crossroads, but the other key issue is the suitability of Redwall Lane itself and the highway network to the west of the site in the Hunton area. The section of Redwall Lane to the east of the site that links it to the A229 is the subject of proposals by the applicant to widen and in some cases improve forward visibility on those sections that are most constrained. There are also improvements proposed to the junction of Redwall Lane with the A229 to improve manoeuvring space and visibility. The Highway Authority's view is that that package of improvements will enable that section of road to accommodate the impact of the proposed development. The highway network to the west of the site, we've been clear in stating from the outset that that network is not suitable for use by heavy goods vehicles. Indeed, there are weight restrictions in that area. So that was a point that was made at the outset. The applicant has come forward with an access design that will physically prevent heavy goods vehicles from egressing in that direction. And on top of that, the applicant has been required to enter into a legally binding HGV routing agreement to provide a further safeguard that those type of vehicles will not use that part of the network. And those are seen to be key requirements as far as the Highway Authority is concerned. There will, of course, also be non-HGV traffic that is using the network to the west of the site. And this is where Linton Crossroads again becomes very important, because with an improvement to Linton Crossroads in place, there is less incentive for road users to avoid that junction by using routes through Hunton. And that applies to staff travelling to and from the development, as well as existing road users that would currently seek to use those roads as a rat run to avoid the delays. So again, that underlines the critical nature of getting the Linton Crossroads improvement in and delivered in a timely fashion. We would also acknowledge that there is an impact further upstream on the A229 within the Maidstone urban area, where there are well-known congestion problems on that part of the network. The issue with this development is that it lies remote from the urban area, and as you move northwards along the A229, that impact is progressively diluted. And on that basis, it would be very difficult for us to sustain an objection on highway grounds. So, to summarise, the Highway Authority does not object to the principle of this development, but that is subject to all of the necessary highway works and the safeguards in terms of the HGV routing agreement being secured as part of any planning consent. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. That's a fairly full reply, I think. Right, I think Councillor Burton was first. Oh, no, Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to return, if I may, to the 3-point speech that was made by one of our members in the gallery earlier. And this was predicated on there being 3 negatives about the application. So I'm going to take the negative out of it, but there are 3 points that I'd want to look at. Firstly, this being in a wrong location, i.e. there are some highways and linkages issues surrounding this application. I personally feel quite comfortable on the basis of the explanation that Mr. Wright's just given us, that the applicant has actually genuinely sought to address these, and that's something laudable, I believe, and I think we should actually take that as a positive for this application. The second 2 present me with a bigger problem, and these are the sort of the 2 sides of the scale. So you've got the obvious breach of policy that this represents as an application, weighed up against the business case, the economic case, the job creation. Breach of policy is something that I know I've spoken about several times at Planning Committee. It makes me wonder why we write policies sometimes as a council. And I know other members on occasion have shared that view with me as well. The business case, I'm not so convinced by, for one reason. And again, I think what this company has achieved within our borough is fantastic, is laudable, is tremendous. But given all of the warnings that we hear at a national level currently concerning the UK food industry and the potential that the supply of labour is somewhat in limbo given our current situation with the European Union, I do have a healthy degree of scepticism about the job creation, which is the main good that is the reason that this application is being recommended for approval. So I'm not entirely convinced by that. And before I ramble on too much longer, that was more or less my point. Thank you, Chairman.
I've merely observed that wherever the labour is, it can't be in limbo because the Vatican has abolished the term. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I have the photograph, the aerial photograph of the site up, please? So I think that's instructive. There was some prolonged pre-application discussions associated with this application, and the scheme has evolved a very long way in terms of what was originally presented to what has now been submitted as a planning application. And I think the key principles, as I would see them, are ones of sustainability. And I think one plank of that sustainability is the sustainability of our villages as balanced communities, and indeed our borough as having a balance between housing and employment, which is becoming more and more strained every day. 30, 40 years ago, we did have a pretty good demographic mix in our villages. I mean, certainly, many of my forebears kind of would never venture out of Sutton Valence and half these places, wouldn't go to the big city of Headcorn, But we've seen this slide into a dormitory status. So I think actually there is a positive in keeping some employment which is not the high-spec end kind of studio-type employment, but actual employment for real people in the rural area. And I think on the Weald that's very important. The other point is about the environment of the Weald. I'm not quite that old, but at the time of the Norman Conquest, the Low Weald was one of the most wooded areas in the whole of the British Isles. It was more akin to northern France and England. It was heavily wooded. In the intervening 1,000 years, the Low Weald is now one of the least wooded places, certainly in the southeast and across the whole of southern England. What this scheme brings as a quid pro quo is it brings a very significant new area of woodland. And one of the problems why we get the flashiness of the clay and the flooding around the belt and so on is because we've lost all our natural vegetation cover. And with our natural vegetation cover, we've lost our wildlife. I think this is potentially the first piece in the jigsaw to start to bring the wildwood back into the Low Weald. But, you know, it's not going to happen unless there's an economic reason for it to happen. And I think changes in the countryside, frankly, I would rather see a big pack house and a big wood than the whole site covered in polytunnels, which flash rainwater off them, which support zero wildlife and don't look very nice from the Green Sand Ridge either. And I think that's the kind of choice we have. So I think that's an issue. And the third part of that sustainability argument is that with this brand new facility, we're seeing a consolidation of older buildings, we're seeing a consolidation of working places into one state-of-the-art modern facility, which in environmental terms is an exemplar. So therefore, the issues around emissions and so on are significantly improved over the more atomised site that currently exists. I do think it could have gone further. I would have liked to have seen conditions around demanding one of the higher Euro standards for the HGVs that service the plant, because I know now that there are some planning conditions attached in other parts of the country where they've got low emission zones where you know, we're seeing some really kind of high quality in terms of the vehicles that are being used to service them. And just as a final point, as a kind of postscript, we as a planning committee, week after week after week, are permitting an unprecedented and a totally unsustainable level of housing. But at the same time, because it's not got the same government impetus behind it as housing has, we're refusing employment. And I really do worry about the stability and the balance of us as a borough if we are an endless sea of red brick boxes and with nowhere for the residents to work whatsoever. So I think that we really do need to look at this to see, does that harm, and there will be some harm, but then again there are benefits. There are benefits in terms of ecology, that's why Kent Wildlife Trust are supporting it, that's why Natural England are very supportive, and frankly, the site is pretty sterile now. It will support lots and lots of wildlife as this is permitted. But the balance of that is that there will be some more vehicles, but saying that, it's an industrial estate anyway, and we might have some more smaller uses, and it won't be as high value a use. You know, a blueberry and a blackberry doesn't take up much space, and it's a very high value cargo. If that is cars or scrap metal or the other things that you often end up being taken out of industrial estates, it will be a lot worse on Redwall Lane. So I think, in balance, I would like to move that we do grant permission as per the papers and the urgent update. Thank you.
Is that seconded? Councillor Mumford, would you like to speak now?
No, I will reserve my right.
Councillor Prendergast, then.
Right. I have huge reservations about this application, and they're based on landscape grounds. If you turn to page 98 of our report, we have our landscape officer. Sorry, where am I? Who, although she acknowledges that the LVIA follows the general principles of current guidelines, she feels that the applicant has underplayed, I presume it was she, has underplayed effects and the earthworks and mitigation that is being introduced will alter the landscape in a contrived way. Well, we've seen the photographs and we've seen the views from the Green Sand Ridge, and the structure will undoubtedly have an impact. And I'm quite disappointed to see that gap between Mr. Jarman and Mr. Wright, because I think it would have been really helpful to have a landscape officer here tonight to answer some of these questions. I have a series of policies that I'm need some reassurance on, because I'm not absolutely convinced that they've been addressed. We've got policy DM34, Design Principles in the Countryside, which talks about outside of the AONB, development should not result in harm to the landscape of highest value, and it should respect the landscape character. Well, we've clearly seen from the landscape officer's report that that hasn't been addressed. We've got policy DM40, new agricultural buildings in the countryside, and it says, if an isolated location is required, it is essential the site should be chosen to minimise the impact of the building on the character and appearance of the area. I don't feel that that's been addressed as far as I'm concerned. We've got policy DM3, which is a historic and natural environment, and it talks at length about landscape. And actually, on page 104 of this report, we speak about Maidstone local landscape character assessment, and we describe this landscape sensitivity as being high and moderate visual sensitivity. Now, that doesn't mean that it's low. It still has a major impact. So that clearly hasn't been addressed with the recommendation. Policy DM5, I want to talk about air quality here a little bit, because we're talking about, I know highways have not raised an objection, but I do think there are air quality issues that we need to address, because where are these 100 HGVs going when they leave the A229 up to the Linton Crossroads, to the Wheatshift Junction, which we all know is currently over 50% above guidelines? How will it impact on the air quality there? Because, you know, there might be appeal implications here if we decide to refuse this. But I am also worried that there might be judicial review implications if we're not careful. And there's plenty of evidence of judicial reviews on that subject. So all in all, I do feel that I don't understand why we have policies if we're not going to stick to them. I don't even see that this site features in DM21, which is retention of employment sites. It's not even featured in that. So, you know, we've got ENV 28, SB 17, DM 21, all the other policies I've quoted. And I am really uncomfortable about the landscape impacts of this development.
Clearly, there are issues which we will return to shortly in terms of the landscape, but I would simply observe that, as the officer said in the report, is all policy considerations are weighed against each other, and what we're here today on either side of the argument is to weigh different policies against each other. And now we can come to a different view. Some of us won't agree with each other or with the officers or whatever, but to weigh a policy and then come down on the side of a particular policy against another one is not to disregard them. That's just it's a judgment call, and I think that needs to be said. But we'll come back to your specific points later. But first, I'm going to take Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions actually for officers, and one follows on from this. Traffic mitigation plan. Although improvements can be made at the Linton Crossroads, as you go along the A229 corridor towards the Wheatsheaf, where we already have a situation where KCC is referring to the road network as being severely congested, a loaded term in terms of the MPPF. I'm mindful of the fact of the profile of vehicles. We've basically got 762 one-way car trips, 92 HGVs, 244 LGV trips. Now, as you head north, there isn't much. Once you go past the Linton Crossroads, fair enough, you could add another lane to the left to help access into Coxheath. But I don't see much in the way of opportunity for dispersal along that corridor from Linton Crossroads to the Wheatsheaf. You've got the Lewes Valley on one side, and you've got the rural lanes of, well, even if you go along the Heath Road, you're at some point you're going to be faced with the Leeds the road through Leeds to meander across to the motorway. And I'm just concerned that there won't be much in the way of dispersal, and we'll have an even bigger problem further down. And I think there's something unique of the A229. We can talk about dispersal generally on the road network, but I just feel we don't, in the south, we don't actually have a lot of opportunity because we don't have access to major dual carriageways or motorway networks. So I would be interested to see whether there was any modelling done in terms of where the traffic will be going at that junction onwards. The other thing I'd like, maybe from the planning officer's perspective, is if he could give a little bit of an indication of what is currently permissible on that site in terms of the type of activity and the type of traffic movements that we could have. What sort of intensification will this be on the road network compared to what they could use the site for currently without a major change of their use there?
I'm sorry, Councillor Clark. I'm not going to entertain any significant discussion on the highways issues unless something very new and dramatic comes up, because we have a situation where the Highways Department have been very clear, but we do have other policies in this debate. But I really would ask members not to spend time on the highway issues because, frankly, that's just pointless. Councillor Clark, Mr Mumford, then the officers will be coming. Councillor Cox. No, because Mr Mumford reserved his right. Okay. If you want to waive yours, Mr Mumford, and let Rob speak first, that's fine, but otherwise you can speak now. I know you're indicating, Councillor Vizard, I've written you down, but I'm taking the first cohort and then I'm bringing the officers back.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to keep this as best I can to a strategic level. The National Planning Policy Framework is generally positive about both securing jobs and growing jobs. As members know, there was a successful appeal against a job-generating use, as we all know, near Junction 8. And the main reason that, perhaps the only reason that was dismissed, is because we're able to show that it significantly and adversely affected the setting of a national policy designation, the area of outstanding natural beauty. Going down to the local plan level, from a national level, again at a very strategic level, our local plan inspector looked in very high-level terms at the levels between, as Councillor Harwood alluded to, the rather significant housing growth, and basically, obviously, it looked at neighbouring authorities as well, all part of the jigsaw, and in sort of strategic sustainability terms, was looking at some kind of commensurate growth in employment. He particularly honed in on offices, and I wouldn't discount the amount of office space being proposed here. But nevertheless, one of the key principles of planning at a strategic level is to keep that sort of overall balance. I don't think we want to end up as a dormitory borough. To my mind as well, coming down a level, I see quite a lot of pack houses in the countryside. I can see not a sort of atomised one off the A274, which is highly successful, and good luck to the owner of that. But I see lots of them around the countryside, and as this very competitive economy advances, market forces are going for this concentrated approach for very good market reasons. I'd say that the main reason for this, in terms of economic development, is security of jobs existing jobs, not just on this site for this business, but other sites. It's key to the network of supply in the, well, beyond the local area. And lastly, keeping it, as I said, at a strategic level, I think most people would agree that jobs are a good thing. If there was an alternative site allocated in the local plan, which has planning permission, then I'm sure that the business would probably have gone there. But I haven't heard tonight this alternative site which is available and of the right size. And obviously it's an existing operation, fits into that logistics jigsaw. Thank you.
Mr. Wynne, yeah. For case officer now, please, unless he wishes to wait.
Just to cover the points raised about the different policies, I think the report sets out quite clearly the landscape sort of considerations. I myself walked the Greensand Ridge Way and the footpath along the river, and I think you can see the photographs presented tonight, and I don't think it's been shied away from the impacts, and I think it's been quite clear where the landscape mitigation will be helpful, but where there'll still be views seen. But I think it's been put into context the environment in which those views will be seen. For example, in this one you can see existing buildings, etc. And I think if you refer back to the economic or the policy context, the policy DM20, I think it is, has been referred to in that it does support the local economy subject to other policies, and obviously the key economic policy is DM41, which refers to economic development in the countryside. I think again the report concludes that it is contrary to that policy because it's not small-scale development, so I think again it's been acknowledged. Going to DM3, that is obviously a policy relating to the natural environment, but that does also refer to things like biodiversity as well, and I think we've covered that in terms of where the landscape impacts are, but also where the benefits are in terms of biodiversity. Moving on to air quality, the application was supported by an air quality assessment, which concluded no significant effects on receptors along the road network or local receptors subject to a mitigation scheme. And our and our environmental health officer actually concluded that there wasn't a significant impact on air quality due to its countryside location. So the applicant has applied the relevant tests, and that has been reviewed by our environmental health officer, who concluded there wasn't a significant effect, and suitable conditions are suggested to deal with the construction stage of the development in terms of air quality. Thank you.
I won't add too much in terms of what already been said. I would just sort of set out the application has been supported by a environmental impact assessment. So in terms of, it's a much higher bar in terms of the assessment that needs to be considered, both with regard to all the matters that the officer has raised. What I would just say to members, effectively what you are considering tonight is that balancing exercise. You've heard from the officers the issues in terms of landscape impact weighed against the issues that you've got in terms of the benefits that arise in terms of Linton Crossroads, in terms of the benefits that accrue from this scheme coming forward. You've got the significant improvements to the biodiversity in terms of the issues, in terms of the 8.9 hectares that are coming forward in terms of the benefits. You've got those economic benefits that are arising from the proposals which relate to the 434 existing jobs which would remain on there, and the 500 new jobs. And in addition to those qualitative jobs, of those 504 new jobs, you've got 151 existing office jobs that are transferring into the borough. So in terms of your balancing exercise, I just point out that those are the issues that you're weighing So the benefits against the disbenefits in terms of the landscape impact, and the case officer has referred to on the issues that they are seen in a context of Bury Gardens, and I know you know it very well, which is an extremely large building in the countryside. So I'm just sort of highlighting those are the sort of the balancing exercise that you're considering tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Cox, and then Mr. Mumford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really feel that we should be encouraged that an existing generation-old company such as Firmins and a newer company as Bury Gardens are willing to look to expand within our borough and to stay here to help us with the local plan and to encourage perhaps other companies to move to Maidstone as well. I've listened to some speakers earlier who were trying to sort of say that there's 1,000 lorry movements, and I think the actual figures state here 244. There are 2 points that I want to raise. One, we see in many forms of transport where it's affecting one specific place, be it an aircraft, an airport, that they're controlling when vehicles leave. And I was wondering whether, as a transport modelling that's been done or could be looked at, that actually controls so that we don't have 5 lorries in a row leaving that would cause even more congestion and more pollution perhaps. So that was one question. Is that sort of thing done in this sort of industry or not? And secondly, was down to the orientation that's been found for the actual pack house itself. Could I have the slide up of the aerial view? Is there a reason why it's that orientation? Or if it was rotated sort of 30 degrees, then some of the woodland could have come around it? Or is it due to natural light and the solar panels, if there are those being put on top? So mine was just a question really, is that a fixed plan, or is there a way we could sort of curl the woodland round more to help in screening perhaps? I'm encouraged as well by the natural green walls as well. So 2 questions really.
I think there is an answer to that question, but we might as well take it. Mr. Wynne now. Oh, both questions, sorry.
Yeah. Well, talking with the landscape, there's the landscape and ecology management plan is controlled by or suggested to be controlled by the legal agreement, which would require final details of the planting specification, the layout. So obviously this has been formulated through, as Councillor Harwood said, a long process. Obviously it's not set in stone in terms of whether so the final detail. But this has obviously been prepared by an ecologist and a landscape specialist. So it may be that there's a ecological reason for the layout as put forward. In terms of the control of vehicles, there is a condition suggested in terms of nighttime movements, but in terms of the general, I think it would be unreasonable from an operational perspective to put a condition to control when and where lorries could exit. But I suspect the high value of the vehicles, it wouldn't be, sort of regular, one after another.
Yes, I think you should clarify both those points.
Yeah, just with regard to the building in terms of the orientation, obviously I previously referred to the way the building, obviously it's been set down into the ground further because obviously there's a bund provision going around to the back of the site. So a lot of care and attention, and I know in terms of the environmental impact assessment, a lot of attention has gone into reducing the visual impact of that building by setting it as low as it can go in the ground without compromising the landscape impact. And also that bund to the back of the site also helps to screen once that's planted up from the southern aspect. With regard to the orientation, I previously referred to the existing Bury Garden building, which is effectively, if we've got an aerial photograph, which effectively shows that this building is positioned in the best location, taking account the existing buildings on the site. And its profile, when you're viewing it from the Greensand Ridge, as profile is as small as possible, so you want to position it in exactly the position it is now, and that is being fixed by this application. So you're considering it in full, and in my view, that is the best location, has been worked through in terms of the LVIA, the officer assessment, And I would also just add that a lot of time and attention has gone into the design merits of this scheme in terms of creating a much visually improved. I wouldn't say this is just any ordinary packing house building. There's a green living wall system, a lot of attention. It's the headquarter office, and a lot of attention has been paid in terms of its landscape impact and its design. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mumford, you have been very patient.
Yeah, I might surprise some of you that I seconded this. As you know, my ward is adjacent to this ward. So my first major concern when I looked at it was HGV movements, etc. What I need is an improvement to Linton Corner, and what everyone in that area needs is an improvement to Linton Corner and Linton Crossroads. And this, according to the modelling, etc., will improve the situation. I have concerns about Redwall Lane, but then I hear that's going to be developed to make it more acceptable for HGVs to use that. So the highways issues are actually a positive, and they're not something we can object to. What I would ask for, very successfully in my parish, we have put unsuitable for HGV vehicles on all of our country lanes, and it has been effective. So I would ask that to be part of the HGV management plan, and that is part of the 106 there. My next thing is we jump on to SP17, which I think I'm the champion, and ENV 28. Right. Well, I've got a balance here to make. The buildings have been lowered. They're 3 metres in the ground. They're fairly low profile. But the impact, as the officers are saying, on the distant views. Well, the countryside is not to be looked at. The countryside is something people work in, and it's the habitat of lots of species. And I'm being offered 25 acres of habitat, managed habitat, next to a treble SI. And that's how I'm balancing this against the normal distant views. It's not about looking at and what we see when we go up to London. It's a working environment. So I can live with that. 25 acres of managed biodiversity and habitat, I'm quite happy with. Then I have got to look at all of us, we say we support the rural community. Every corner had a shop on it once, and then we built Tesco's. Every single farm had a pack house and a cold store on it. Those that still exist, and Councillor Carrack experiences it daily. We've got one on Bolton Lane, and we've got HGVs using Bolton Lane to access those facilities. At least the highways here are looking at access to it. I, non-academic, looked for a job in the area, and I had to leave it in the end. I couldn't find a job, and the situation has not improved. I'm speaking here tonight for all the young people that are not going to be commuters to London, in Coxheath, Ormond, Chelsea, Hunton. All of those young people need to get a job. We've got no highway issue. We can balance the environmental issue, and we can give people jobs. That's why I've seconded this motion.
Right, that's Councillor Vizard next. Thank you. You've been very patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just purely a question of clarification from one of the officers. There seems there's no air quality strategy, and we've spoken about air quality a couple of times. Can we is there a possibility of putting a condition on that the vehicles servicing this site must be of the highest Euro regulations for Euro 3 or 4? I know it's going to be a difficult issue to police, but I don't know whether it's a condition that's possible to go on.
If this application had come up in about 6 months' time, possibly, because we're consulting on our low emission strategy now. So I would suggest you go away and give a robust response to that, because the two really do have to be linked together in that sense, in terms of the emissions. So that would be tricky at the moment. It's not, and obviously this application has to be determined on the policy that's in place at the moment. Can you add to that? I think that's correct. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't think it wouldn't be reasonable at this point in time to impose a condition on vehicles that would need to meet that standard, mainly because we haven't got the policies in place that would deal with that particular issue. So it wouldn't meet those particular tests that, as we all know, that you'd need to meet.
And it's unlikely that the government are going to, at this stage, move to supporting emission zones for, shall we say, Shire county towns. But that's not to say that the Client Earth might not succeed in some of their court cases against the government in the near future, and that have to be reconsidered. Did you want to ask a supplement?
Only in as much as could we, because as you're saying, in 6 months' time we could be hit by this. Could we not put an informative on it?
Yeah, Mr.
So we certainly can put an informative on it, but perhaps we could highlight it in the travel plan as well, sort of active encouragement, to coincide with what Councillor Vizard has suggested.
That would certainly be a way around it. Councillor Harwood. As a contingent part of that document, we could probably approach it that way. Does that answer your question, Councillor Vizard? Thank you very much. So I move on to Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just a bit confused where the extra employment would come from. Would it be local or would it be, someone suggested it was from abroad? And the other point I've got is, what percentage of the berries come from abroad?
Well, the berries, very few. But we'll take a few more questions before I come back. You've got to note those. Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you. Well, reading here, this is a significant departure from the local plan, and relocation here is going to have an impact on the local area. We're looking at, I think someone said, or it's in the papers, 108 HGVs a day. And I think Hunton and Linton rightly have objected. That's going to have quite an impact on the road network there and those small villages. So I can't really support that. It is an industrial process. It's package, it's storing, distribution, storage, distribution. And Bury Garden do import produce for packing and distribution. It's not necessarily from that particular place, but it is a departure from the local plan. I think we should be looking quite carefully at this because it's going to have an impact on the road network locally, and particularly Hunton, Linton, and they have both objected, the parish councillors, so they have a duty to look at that.
Right. Councillor Round, as you haven't yet spoken, I'll take you ahead of Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I've heard a great deal of debate, some of which I would have said myself. And I've been trying to summarise it. I mean, yes, we do have, undeniably, landscape harm, but we also have enhancement. It is a departure from our plan, but it is significant in terms of jobs. And what one tends to forget, that this is the modern-day version of what would actually be described as an old-fashioned style Wealden enterprise. It's soft fruits. It's the modern day. So we have so many issues to balance. There are traffic issues, but they have been addressed. I think the key issue comes down, personally, because there is so many balancing acts here, as the point originally raised by Councillor Matt Burton. This is contrary to our policy. We don't actually want to deny it fundamentally. It's actually contrary to our policy. And I think that is the key issue. I've used to work in the food industry. I recognise this is a great opportunity, but fundamentally it's contrary to our policy.
Yeah, at the end, of which we're approaching, Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Chairman. I understand the economic benefits of this. I understand what Mr. Jarman said about jobs. And I also understand what he said about a recent appeal being the landscape grounds, but that it was an AONB. But the MPPF is really, really clear about the intrinsic beauty of the countryside and protecting valued landscapes. I've got a few things I just want to move on. I also understand what Mr. Wynne said, that as you look at the Green Sand Ridge, you can see existing buildings. But, you know, simple maths tells you that harm plus more harm doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't negate anything. It just adds to the harm. And clearly, this is a balancing judgment. Councillor English, you've stressed that yourself. It's a balancing judgment. It's landscape against the economic benefits. But I do not think we have addressed the landscape issues fully, and I am extremely concerned that we're balancing this on landscape, and the landscape officer isn't here to answer any questions. I've got questions that need answering. Yes, I do appreciate the professional judgment of the officers who are sitting here, but there should be somebody sitting there to answer these questions. And I am so concerned that I think I'm going to move to refuse on this, on the grounds of the policies that I've stated already, DM34, DM40, DM3, DM5, ENV28, SP17, DM21, and any relevant MPPF policies that we can think of regarding the countryside, because I think this is just wrong.
I wasn't going to formally take a position yet, but I think I will as we think we're moving to conclusion. Yes, policies have to be balanced against each other, and it doesn't necessarily follow that we're disregarding a particular policy in either direction if we give greater weight to another policy. It's just that all planning decisions, all planning recommendations, you have to weigh different factors. In terms of what the MPPF says about landscape, yes, it does talk quite a lot about landscape harm. It also talks a lot about biodiversity. So, and landscape is not just, the character of the landscape is a combination of the view and also what lives on and thrives on that landscape. It has to be admitted, a lot of the farmed landscape of Kent and the rest of Britain is, from an ecological point of view, dead, apart from the crop that is grown on it. So it's good to see ecological mitigation. No, it's not mitigation, it's actually enhancement. In terms of the highways issues, well, the Highways Authority hasn't objected, and overall it would seem that the highways issue, in terms of how it's been dealt with, is actually likely to lead to a somewhat of an improvement over the current position. How much is debatable, because that depends on all sorts of factors, but it does seem like something of an improvement. So it does come down at the end to how much weight these factors are given. Employment is a very important issue. I think, I have to be honest, and this is not going to be a popular thing in certain circles, but there is a tendency to try and turn the countryside into a chocolate box photograph of a countryside with no actual activity taking place in it whatsoever. And I'm afraid that, on balance, I think we do have to try and keep some economic activity going in the country, and actually in the countryside, and promote and support employment opportunities insofar as we can. I'm not saying I'm completely happy about this, but the fact of the matter is that The other possible potential sites that might have existed in the borough have effectively been closed off by decisions we've made in planning committee quite recently. So the other opportunities that might have existed are not there because we've taken a stance that development in those places is effectively in principle unacceptable. That's what we've done. So there is nowhere else to go. If this application fails, it won't just not be an expansion of this site, it may well be a lot of people's livelihoods at risk. And that, of course, means that the use of the site will be up for further discussion. Well, in that case, it'll almost certainly, as a partly brownfield site, in effect, become another housing estate. It will. So I will end up, on balance, I have to support the application. Mr. Jarman.
You mentioned something about it turning into a housing estate, or was that somewhere
I
else?
should have thought it was quite obvious, Councillor Stockwell, that if the business goes under, which it could do, if it, in terms of Maidstone, in other words, it moves to another borough, which I'm speaking, would you mind listening? You asked a question, I'm answering it. Have given me the courtesy of listening or getting back to your internet shopping. Now, which is what you've been doing, which what you've been doing in council meetings.
Didn't quite catch that, Chairman. Get back to what?
You have been doing that in meetings, and it's about you should concentrate on the meeting instead of doing that. Now, Councillor Stockwell, you have asked a question. If the use becomes vacant, clearly it's going to have another use. There is government policy, considerable government policy, in support of the conversion of agricultural businesses into other businesses or into housing. That was a large part of the changes to permitted development rights and to government policy in general. So it's quite obvious that if the use becomes vacant, it will have another use. It's as simple as that. Mr. Jarman, you wanted to come.
Yeah, on our very point, as councillors know, there's extensive permitted development for agricultural buildings as well. But I wanted to go back to this point about balance. One of the key factors for me is the lack of alternative sites. I keep coming back to the point that I haven't heard any alternative sites. And obviously, planning decisions aren't binary. They're multi-layered. I know if this application were to be refused, we would have to demonstrate how our policies, I should say, cater for this type of use, i.e., where is this alternative site in our borough? Because as I keep saying, I haven't heard any views to the contrary, that jobs, particularly local jobs, are a good thing. So it's incumbent on a planning authority in shaping the future of the borough to provide sites. But as I keep saying, I haven't heard any alternative site put forward.
I'm not going to have this turn into a ping-pong match. You've put forward quite cogently, I think, Councillor Prendergast, whether one agrees with it or not, you put forward quite a cogent list of policies which clearly do apply. And I want to know whether you wish to amplify those, add to those at this point. Would you like to repeat them, please? Because I think it's important. I will bring you in.
I'm sorry I was unable to identify alternative sites, but my name is not located in Kent. Right. Policies DM34, DM40, DM3, policy DM5, ENV28, SP17, DM21. Perhaps officers could help me with relevant countryside policies in the MPPF. I can't recall them offhand. Will that do, Chairman?
Oh, that's quite sufficient, yes. We will try and nail down the relevant
I mean, I
paragraph.
could give you the relevant paragraphs within those policies is, but I'm sure we all know them. Thank you.
I'm sure we can locate those.
Thank you.
Councillor Round, did you want to say something again at this point?
I merely wanted to say, I mean, I think the debate's gone a bit further, but at one point in time, I hear what Mr. Jarman says. But I'm sorry, but this comes back down to that point that was originally made. We do not have the appropriate policies, and we should have one, because this will not be the first time this sort of thing happens. It's bound to happen again.
I think the point is well made. Councillor Prendergast, you proposed refusal on this grounds. Now, can I check whether there was a seconder at that point? Thank you very much, Councillor Stockel. Right, Councillor Spooner, I think you're indicating and trying to come back on a point, so I will take you.
Yeah, I've had great difficulty with this application. I'm all for diversification of the rural economy. I'm all for providing jobs in rural areas, and this has been done by lots of converted farm buildings. But the more I look at it, I just see this as being the industrialisation of the countryside. I have every sympathy for the applicants. I'm sure they are a fabulous firm, and I wish them well. But I think that this site is just not the right one for them. If it was well related to the transport network, if it was well related to a town or a village or in a more sustainable site, I could support it. But this is really in the middle of nowhere, and that is a greenfield site. It may have permitted development rights on the where the existing industrial area is to the north of Redwell Lane. There's obviously PD rights on, there's some silos and other buildings to the east. But if you go and look at it, it is a massive greenfield site in the middle of the countryside, in the middle of nowhere.
Right, and this is the last time you're coming back. Mr Mumford, I'll take you in a minute.
I just wanted to pick up on a point that Councillor Round picked up in terms of the point, obviously, linked to what Mr Jarman said earlier. In terms of the policy, you said we don't have the policy issues, because we've got the DM20 policy, which is the economic development policy, which says supports proposals for the expansion of existing economic premises in the countryside. We then go in terms of the key policy, which is DM21, retention of employment sites, and that effectively identifies the economic development areas. And I then link back to, yes, it's quite right, this site is not identified in that economic development area. Then that's why we have to go to the need issue. And in terms of the alternative sites that Mr Jarman raised, and as part of one of the key requirements of an environmental statement is to identify an alternative site provision. So unlike a normal planning application, there isn't necessarily that need to go and do that almost extensive search for alternative sites. This application has had to do that because it's accompanied by an ES. So on that basis, there's a further need to do that exhaustive requirement. So effectively what we are saying, and Mr Jarman has already alluded to it, there are policies for this particular type of application, and they are set in the plan. But effectively, what we're not doing in this area is that we haven't got a site that can provide for the needs of this business. This business is a local business. I previously referred to in terms of its associations with Clockhouse Farm and how it, the need for travel and everything else. So it's a local business without an alternative place to provide for their needs. And I just wanted to sort of emphasise that there are policies that cater for this particular issue.
Does that answer your concern, Councillor Round, before we move on?
Reluctantly.
Okay, I'll take that as a guarded yes then. Councillor Mumford.
Just very quickly, you're looking at the 1,000 jobs and you're talking about supporting the rural economy. Every time we get a polytunnel, and we are the consumers, the only way you can farm strawberries is under a polytunnel, and we object to it. The only way you can get soft fruit to market is to get it off the fields and into refrigeration within 30 minutes. So the farms around this could use it. And what you're doing is you're denying those farmers the ability to enter the market, the 21st century market in which you are the consumer and expect strawberries 24 hours a day, 24 months a year. People do. And you are worried, if you're talking about an objection based on landscape, balanced against that one view, against all the biodiversity of 25 acres managed. If that was a housing estate, and we've seen many, you look at where the buildings are, there will be about 60 houses there. We would ask for a bit of screening around it, a little bit of green space, and it will get through. It will get past SP17 and EMV 28. We support the rural economy. We can't object, and I will be with you, on highways. That objection is not there. We keep putting residential houses in our rural environment. And for one view, you're going to turn down 1,000 jobs for those people, and you're going to turn down the ability of the farmers in that area to turn to soft fruit. You support the rural economy? No, a lot of people just drive up the road and look at our films, which is our workplace, it's our factory floor, and we employ our young people on it, and it's dying.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. I think the positions have been... Oh, sorry, Councillor Powell, you haven't spoken yet, so I will...
No, I think I'm the only one that hasn't spoken on this. It was really just to follow up on Councillor Round. I mean, he made some extremely good points earlier on, and I know this is Wimbledon season, but people are kind of, the ball's going backwards and forwards over the net. You said this policy, you said that policy, you said that policy. Well, I think we're probably at, I suppose, juice at the moment, yeah. And but Councillor Round's questions wasn't answered on the policies, and I did feel for you, Councillor Round, when you said reluctantly. Because I don't believe you meant reluctantly. I believe you meant no and not yes.
Okay, I think, unless anyone has anything desperately new to add, that we have rehearsed this, as indeed was right, to great length, because it is an important decision. The motion has been moved to refuse the application on the grounds of the landscape harm and as set out in the policies referred to by Councillor Prendergast. Have you got the complete list there?
Well, I haven't got... Sorry, Chairman, I haven't got a full reason that would need to be set out at this time. I've got policies that were referred to, but I would need a full reason. I can't... I would just have to have it put in the context, identifying clearly where the harm is,
right,
setting out the policies.
If I may attempt to assist you, I think Mr Wynne referred to the long view from the Greensand Way and to local views from the footpaths to the south, which is clearly the context of where the actual harm would occur, which I think is the element that the officer was asking for in relation to the policies. Are you clear what I'm saying there, Councillor Prendergast?
Sorry, Chairman, thank you. I think what the landscape officer has to say is quite pertinent, that the mitigation and the earthworks will alter the landscape in a contrived way. So that is a landscape harm.
I think that would be very difficult to argue, because the entire landscape of Britain has been altered in a contrived way for 2,000 years. So I think that would be quite difficult. But what is being said by the report is quite clearly that there are effects, negative landscape effects, which are, in relation to the policies you set out, from the long views from the big. And that the actual harm is the long views from the Greensand Way and the shorter distance views from footpaths to the south, which cause harm to the landscape in accordance with the policies SP17, EMV 28, and the relevant paragraphs of the National Planning Policy Framework. And it is for members to determine whether those policies outweigh the other policies that have been set on the other side of the balance. Councillor Stock.
Well, there was the impact on the local road network as well.
No, absolutely not. We are not objecting on that ground. We are not the Highway Authority. If the Highway Authority makes an objection on the road network, then we're quite happy to support it. But as everyone knows, that is unusual. It doesn't often happen. So if members are minded to refuse this application, there is a policy which can be taken into account. But please, members, don't add something that, you know. Yeah. We will give Mr Bailey a few minutes to write his note, to complete writing the note down. That would be wise, I think. Councillor Hall. I'm sorry to do this again for a second time in the evening, but it's very important before we go to vote on the amendment. Bear in mind, it may or may not pass. We're not assuming anything here. But we must get the wording right. So I'm going to adjourn for a further 5 minutes for consideration of that wording. It's adjourned.